And now, it's time for the Well-Read Llama with your host, author Erin Mifflin.
Hello, friends. February has brought a bit of warmer weather to the Ozarks, and we are loving every minute. I don't know about you, but I'm ready for spring. We're praying for good weather for our wedding day, which is coming up in less than 3 weeks. Can you believe it? If you want to follow along with my wedding journey, and of course my writing journey once I'm settled in after this happy event, please follow me on Facebook or Instagram at author Erin Mifflin. I would love to have you join me. Our guest today is Carrie Walker. Carrie is a wife, mom, and former youth minister. She writes stories of ordinary people living extraordinary love. If you're a fan of Katie Powner, I would definitely recommend looking into Carrie's stories, and I can't wait to tell you more about them and about how she and I became friends. If you're enjoying these interviews, could you take a moment and let me know? I'd love to hear if you followed any of these authors or found any new favorite books. I'm looking forward to bringing you more glimpses into the wide world of Christian fiction and the wonderful people who write it. Speaking of those wonderful people, let's bring in today's author. Hi, Carrie, and welcome.
Hello, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. So your new book, Right Before Their Eyes, just released. Can you tell us what the story is about?
Sure. Yeah, for readers who've read Emma's Hero, this is a continuation of Mason and Claire's story. And for really anyone who picks up the story, it's a story of second chances, love that serves and saves, and the power of each individual to touch others. And right before their eyes, I weave two storylines. One is a friends to lovers story between a young foster care social worker, Claire, who volunteers to also be a temporary caregiver for her grandmother with dementia, and her best friend, Mason. Claire's dating a career-driven lawyer at the beginning of the story, and also at that time, her grandma's condition worsens kind of without warning. Mason, he grew up a lot in Emma's Hero, the first book in the series, in regards to his faith and confidence, but he still is a bit of a mess when it comes to communicating his emotions, and he's loved Claire for years, but the time was never right to tell her, and now he's in a position where he may need to relocate for medical school. The second storyline highlights one of Claire's foster teens, Lucia. She lost her grandmother at 8, and with her parents in prison, has bounced between foster homes to land in a group home right at the beginning of the story. And her life quickly kind of goes on a downward spiral. And the way that these stories knit together is really only something God could orchestrate.
Yes, it's true. And we see that in our lives, too, the way God brings people in and out of our lives.
Yeah, I feel like that's something I try to work into all my stories, because oftentimes I feel like the thing that ends up being, maybe where you see God is sometimes a person you weren't expecting it from, or, something maybe you weren't even going to do, and then it ends up being life-changing. So.
And why is this particular book close to your heart?
For a couple of reasons. First, I would say that this is the first book I wrote after I realized I loved to write. Emma's Hero was my debut novel, and I really ended up writing that story because God put the story on my heart, but I never actually knew going into it whether I'd even finish it or if I'd enjoy writing at all. So this was the first book I actually set out to write, and the whole journey was fun, and the story is close to my heart because I hope it shows like how God is working even when you can't see him. There's a point in this story where two characters are going through really low points in their life, and where everyone in the story at that point is kind of questioning where God is in their own lives, and it's actually through these really low points when they see his face. And I hope that it might resonate with readers who are struggling, that sometimes it's in those low places where you might see God, or even be the way that God is shown to someone else.
Yes. Now, the character of Grandma Dottie was special to me. I had the opportunity a few years ago to provide a bit of respite care for my friend who was a caretaker for her grandmother with dementia. And those were very meaningful times for me as I saw love and the sanctity of life in a totally new way. And normally we use the term sanctity of life to refer to the unborn, but the idea of respecting, valuing, and protecting life can apply to anyone who cannot care for themselves, and that includes the elderly. So has dementia or a similar disease affected anyone that you know personally?
Yes, actually, my own grandmother also suffered with dementia in the final years of her life, and our family kind of like Claire in this story, worked really hard to try to help her stay at home. And that meant like a lot of us taking shifts, staying with her, running back and forth, helping with her doctor's appointments and her food and everything. And it was, and it really was a mix of like, the hard parts of watching her lose parts of herself, but also just the gift of spending that time with her and having the whole family come together. And it really had so many blessings in that time as well.
Yes, it is very hard, but it is very rewarding in its own way if you can do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So speaking of the sanctity of life, your first book, Emma's Hero, grabbed me from the moment I read the first chapter. So tell us about this book and what inspired it.
Okay, it's a story about a single woman who learned she was pregnant with a baby that doctors told her wouldn't survive, that they deemed the baby incompatible with life. But the baby actually does live and changes the life of a troubled teen and brings a lot of special people into the mom's life as well. And the story was inspired actually by a woman that I knew. My husband and I did youth ministry for 10 years, and one of those teens, grew up to be a woman, and she also gave birth to a baby with this similar condition that I wrote about in the book, and she was caring for the baby by herself, and, she had very special needs, and it was, very challenging for her at times, and I had gone to visit them in the hospital one of the times the baby was admitted to the hospital, and when I just met this tiny, tiny little baby. She was 7 months old, but she was smaller than most newborns that I had met. I just was struck with, how many lives that she probably had touched and her mom probably never knew. And that just kind of planted a seed for a story that ended up growing into that first book.
Yes. And how are you encouraging readers to use Emma's Hero to support their local crisis pregnancy centers?
Well, for all my books, I'm always happy to join a book club meeting, whether in person or virtually. And for Emma's Hero, I've kind of encouraged the book clubs, if they're open to the idea, to throw a baby shower for Theo. Theo is the fictional baby in Emma's Hero, and the idea behind the baby showers for Theo is that anyone interested could bring a donation to the book club meeting that pregnancy centers are in need of. I actually have a list on my website of items that are common needs for a crisis pregnancy center, and then those items can be donated to the local crisis pregnancy center in the area, and kind of brings the story full circle, since it was the help that was brought to the mom in the story that ended up really bringing all the people into her life and changing, their lives as well.
I think it's really awesome, and one of those things that only God can do, to use this young woman that you know personally and through her baby. And again, this is something that's very hard in her life, but God inspired you and he called you to write this story in a fictional way to encourage others. And, so much good can come from something that is so hard.
Yeah, I know. And it is amazing to see when you look back at it, because kind of like the whole message of that story was how this baby who really never left his house changed so many lives. And then just, if you believe the story changed at all, that same thing happened with this other baby in real life that, yes, really never left her house very often, had so many special needs, and by her life, the story ended up being written. And I'd like to hope that, even more good can come of it as it spends more time out in the world.
Do you have any more books planned in this series?
Yeah, there's one more book in this series which will release next spring, and over the course of the series we've watched Mason's character grow from a troubled teen in Emma's Hero to a more confident young adult in Right Before Their Eyes, but he still, has some learning to do in the relationship realm. And then in the last book, he's now an adult, actually struggling with the call that God gave him to be a doctor, because he's at that point where he's facing some of the more real things in the doctor world. And over the course of the series, we also have this undercurrent theme of watching how this baby in the first book that doctors counted out as, not even going to live, continues to change the world. And by the end of this last book, you'll see how even years later, the trickle-down effect, the ripple effect of his life and changing the world even years later.
I'm looking forward to that. How do you have time to write as a busy mom of 7?
Goodness. I really think that God gives me time because literally it seems like there's no time. But I make a point to snag any little snippet I have, and somehow the book gets written. It's not unheard of to see me with a laptop in the back of a car typing while kids are in activities. And I kind of have set myself on a rhythm throughout the year where I kind of have a rule with myself that I've got to draft my novel before summer starts because once summer starts, I can't hear the voices in my head anymore because they're all home and we're doing all the things. So, that's a time where I could probably edit, but to actually create things is just those few months every year is just not probably going to happen.
Yes. I think you kind of already answered this one, but have you always wanted to be a writer?
Not in the way that it was like set out to be a goal. Like I've always loved to read, and I think anyone who's a voracious reader always has that little thing in the back of their head, like, what if I wrote a book, And I always had that, and I often had teachers in school suggest that I should write, but it wasn't until God really put that story on my heart for Emma's Hero that I actually had the nudge to write and start pursuing all that involves.
Right. And what has surprised you most on your journey to publication and bringing these stories into the world?
Honestly, how slow it is. I went to college to be an engineer, and I actually worked in that industry for 2 years before staying home with my kids. And everything in the engineering world is, what have you done for me yesterday? So to write a book and submit it and not hear anything for months was so foreign to me. And then, perhaps get a revise and request and for a resubmit and have publishers actually expect that I'm going to take months to do that is just mind-blowing when you're in such a different industry prior. And then even once you get the contract, the amount of time it takes to make it to print. I wrote 2 more books in the time between when I signed my first contract to it releasing, and it's just such a different, and me and my husband marvel over it still because he's still in the engineering world, and he'll be like, it's so different than what I'm working with, I'm like, I know, it's such a different industry.
Yes, it just takes time.
But, you can see the creative realm, how the time is necessary, because sometimes that's what it takes to really, cultivate the story. Like, creative ideas don't necessarily develop yesterday, and sometimes that time is necessary.
Yes, that's a very good point. And you and I met through the critique group offered by American Christian fiction writers. Do you recommend working with critique groups for any aspiring authors who might be listening?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if I'd be published without the help of my critique partners. And not only do they help you see what your manuscript needs to shine, but they've become such a support system in this long and sometimes challenging journey as a writer because they're on it as well. And we kind of like pull each other up when we need it and, encourage each other. It's really been a gift.
Yes, I found that too. They become such good friends, and yes, and the way that you can cheer for each other, like few others can when you've been with each other on the journeys.
Absolutely. It's so helpful to have other people who are going through the same thing that can really identify, the struggles and the joys and celebrate the victories that we have together and, root each other on.
What are some of the joys in your life besides writing and motherhood?
Okay, no writing, no motherhood. Okay, let's see. Well, I love my husband. He's my best friend. We've been together since high school. We still go on monthly dates every month and even have mini coffee dates every day after dinner. And I love board games. We have 2 huge closets filled with them, and we do weekly board games with our friends. And I love going on vacations to new places and planning them, sometimes with the kids, sometimes just me and my husband if we can sneak away. And, we just recently started helping with the high school youth ministry as well at a parish nearby, which is really the first time we've been able to do that in about 10 years because we had so many young ones for so long that we just kind of had to, put that on the back burner when we were raising our kids. So that's another new joy that's been in our life recently.
And is there a scripture that has been meaningful to you recently?
Well, one that I always kind of go back to is Lamentations 3:22 to 23, where, talks about God's love never being consumed and his mercies are new every morning. And I just always find that to be such a peaceful verse to sit with, whether it's your writing struggles that you feel like you hit a wall, or maybe, life with my kids or my husband, or you're struggling and you just like, tomorrow's new and God is there. And it's just like, I just always come back to that one.
Such a comfort. How can readers connect with you?
Well, if you go to my website, which is www.carriewalkerwrites.com, there is a form you can fill out to sign up for my newsletter. It also has links to every social media that I'm on. I'm on BookBub and Goodreads and Amazon, Facebook, Instagram. I've even tried a little bit of TikTok, but all the links are there. So my website's probably the easiest place to go to find all the different places that I'm at.
All right. And you mentioned also that you have book club kits available. Is that right?
Yes, I have everything up there for the first book for the book club, and I'm about to add all the stuff for Right Before Their Eyes as well. By the time this airs, it'll probably be up there. And there's information on how to contact me if anybody ever would like me to visit one of their book clubs. And all the books also have questions in the back of them for discussion questions.
Yes, so they can go to carriewalkerwrites.com and check that out.
Yes, that's the place.
It was good to have you here today.
Yes, and thank you so much again for having me. I was so excited to come.
Listeners, I hope you will go check out Carrie's stories. As I mentioned, her book, Emma's Hero, struck me from the beginning as something that can be absolutely life-changing in the hands of the right reader. It also rang so authentic to me because when I was 13, my yet unborn baby sister received a terminal diagnosis related to a birth defect. And that was a very formative time in my life, and I went through that with my family, and I could tell when I was reading Emma's Hero that Carrie wrote from a place of firsthand experience about such a difficult topic. And so, she had the young woman from her youth group that she was walking alongside when this happened, and just the way that God works through things to bring that baby's story into the world where it can still touch other people. And just as a reminder of some of these difficult things, there is always grace and there's always love to carry us through. And as Carrie's tagline says, she writes ordinary people living extraordinary love, and she makes it no secret that the love she writes of comes from God. I also have a number of friends involved in foster care, and we also talked about how Grandma Dottie's storyline touched me in Right Before Their Eyes. So this is also a needed story that I believe will bless hearts and hopefully inspire those who are caregivers or who are working in the foster system or might be leaning towards that. And this would be a good way to check into this and see, what it is about that Carrie also writes from her own experience there as well. So yes, go find these books and prepare to have your heart touched, as I know it will be. I would be so delighted if you would also follow me as an aspiring author on my own long journey to publication. I'm trusting the Lord to bring that about at the right time. I write historical romance, and my joy is finding real life history that I can bring to life through fiction by writing fictional characters and mixing into real world events so that I can explore history. There are some authors who already do this, and they are very inspirational to me. And I know when I pick up their books that I am just going to be reading something that is very well researched and something that is going to bring history to life in a brand new way. And that is what I hope I will be able to do, and my books will be able to do for readers when they have the chance to read them. So it would mean a lot to me if you would follow me, and especially if you like historical romance, if that's something that sounds good to you, then you can follow me at author Erin Mifflin on Facebook or Instagram. I also have a website where you can sign up for my monthly newsletter, and that's at authorerinmifflin.com. As I mentioned at the beginning, my wedding is coming up very, very soon, but we're going to bring you some more interviews before then, and then we'll take a little break for me to enjoy some time off with my brand new husband at that point. and then we'll be back with more. And I'm really excited about the guests that we have lined up and the variety of genres and stories that we're going to be talking about. Just continuing to help you as a reader discover what is out there in Christian fiction, these stories that can inspire your faith as well as entertain your mind. And I hope that you will tune in, and also that you will let me know, as I mentioned earlier also, just let me know if there's any that have been particularly meaningful to you or a blessing to you. And especially if you've gone and read some of these stories, I would absolutely love to hear about that. So until next time, happy reading!
Join us next week for another episode of The Well-Read Llama with your host, author Erin Mifflin. If you'd like to find out more about author Erin Mifflin, visit her Facebook and Instagram accounts.